Writers, it's Misty W with another mini lesson that you can use to write in your quarantine journal. Today's lesson is called Past and Present. I've been thinking about historians and how historians use source documents to learn about the past. You know that your journal is one of those source documents that historians will use like 50 years in the future to understand what life was like during this particular moment in time, to try to understand what was life like during this quarantine, during this pandemic. Historians also use photographs to understand what life was like in the past. So I was thinking about what was life like 50 years ago from this time? And how was life different? So you know what I did? I went online and I looked for some photographs of what life looked like 50 years ago. You want to see? Okay. This is an audio cassette. 50 years ago, if you wanted to listen to music, you couldn't ask Alexa, you couldn't use a smartphone. There was no Bluetooth, there was no even CDs didn't exist 50 years ago. You had to listen to music on a cassette or on a radio. If you wanted to make a phone call, there were no smartphones. This was the phone that you had to use, and it had a receiver, that thing on top that has the cord attached, and you had to dial the person's number using those small little circles you see in front of you. And you couldn't walk away with the phone. You had to sit next to that phone. The furthest you could go is how far that little curly cord stretches. If you wanted to watch TV, you couldn't go on a tablet. There weren't any. There was no Netflix. You had to crowd around a TV about this size and just watch a few channels. And look at classrooms 50 years ago. Do you notice how different they look? The desks look different. I don't see a classroom library. And if you look at this picture, you'll notice behind the teacher, she has a chalkboard. There were no computers. She didn't have an Elmo to project any of the things she wanted to show the class. She didn't even have a dry erase board. She had to write all of her math problems on the chalkboard and then erase it with an eraser. So things really do change a lot in 50 years. And I think it would be really wonderful to spend a little time in your journal showing just how life was like, not just during this moment in time, but historians are going to also want to know what was life like a bit before we went home due to the coronavirus pandemic. Every time you come to one of these lessons, I am asking you to write about what life is like during the coronavirus. And that's perfect, right? Because what we're trying to do is to record what life is like right now. So for our future self and for historians to understand what is it like for a kid to live through all of this. But it might also be very interesting for a historian and for yourself to compare what life was like before the shutdown. And we can't do this now, but it would be really awesome to write about what life is like after the pandemic. And I can't wait to do that. What is life like when we do finally go back to school? So today what I was thinking is we can think about how learning at home was different before the shutdown compared to right now. And one tool that we can use to think about those things is a tool that historians use, which you've seen before, and it is called a timeline. You guys have seen these before. Timelines have arrows if the time continues afterward. So this is our school year. We started school in late August, okay? And then in around mid-March, we went home because it wasn't safe for us to be at school anymore. I was thinking today's journal topic, we could write a little bit about what life was like here and compare it to what life is like here after we got home. So here's some of the topics I thought we could write about. One thing that definitely comes to mind is to think about technology. How did we use technology before in school, before we came home, and then after we came home? For example, I'm thinking I still used technology when I came to your class to teach. I used my computer, I used the Elmo, I used PowerPoint presentations, but I did not make videos for you back then. So technology has changed a lot in the way that I use it. I also didn't teach classes on Zoom, right? How about you? What kind of technology did you use at school or at home before we went on quarantine and now? What about playing? How did you play during these months between August and March at school or after school? And what about how are you playing now that you're at home, learning from home? Another thing that you might want to write about is work. Both your work, what did it look like when you did your schoolwork at school and after school? And now that you're at home, what about your parents' work? How's that different? Those between August and March and now, how does their work look differently? And then another thing you might think about is your supplies. How did you get your supplies for work or for anything else, just for a living, before we came home and after? Some words that will help you compare and contrast these time periods are these ones. You can say, oops, camera. Before we were learning at home, or you could even say prior to learning at home, we use technology at school in the following ways. Then you could say something like now, or currently, let's see if I can. Now or currently, we use technology in other ways. So before we used technology in one way, currently we use it another way. Prior to going home for quarantine, we played in this way. Currently or now, we play a different way. So friends, do historians a favor, do yourself a favor. Think a little bit about how these things were like in the past and compare them to the present. Historians will thank you, and so will your future self. Find a cozy corner, do your best thinking and writing, and off you go.